From the outside, Philip Donovan's life seemed like a fairy tale. A self-made millionaire, his Hollywood Hills mansion gleamed under the California sun, a testament to his success and ambition. At his side stood his devoted pregnant wife, Isabel, the woman who had supported him through every trial. But in the glittering world of high-stakes business and endless parties, temptation was easy to find, and even easier to indulge. When a cunning mistress arrived on the scene, she offered Philip excitement, forbidden passion, and the promise of something new. Little did he know that single choice would unravel everything he held dear. Philip Donovan's rise in the business world resembled one of those larger-than-life success stories shared on the covers of Forbes and Fortune. He'd grown up in a modest home in Jacksonville, Florida, watching his parents struggle to make ends meet while dreaming of something bigger, determined to break the cycle. Philip had dedicated himself to his education, putting in countless hours at the local library, devouring textbooks on finance and earning scholarships to prestigious programs. At 25, he used a small inheritance from his late grandmother to launch his first tech startup, producing software designed to connect local businesses with an emerging global marketplace. That company, Donovan Tech Solutions, soon flourished, drawing the attention of major venture capitalists in Silicon Valley. Philip's life changed overnight. His phone rang endlessly with prospective partners, buyout offers, and investment proposals. Determined to maintain control, he used the new funding to expand Donovan Tech worldwide. Before he turned 30, Philip found himself among the ranks of the rising tech millionaires. He was young, handsome, and newly wealthy. Conference organizers invited him to speak at events in New York, London, and Tokyo. Business journalists hailed him as a pioneer who saw untapped potential in smaller communities. He was showered with praise and constantly attended gatherings hosted by the biggest names in tech, people like Mark Cuban, Jeff Bezos, and other luminaries who would appear at the same summits. It was at one of those gatherings that he met Isabel. She was a legal intern at a high-profile Los Angeles law firm, attending the networking event in hopes of meeting prospective tech clients. Their first conversation was a whirlwind. They bonded over their mutual love of reading detective novels, their experiences growing up in working-class families, and how they both found the pomp and flair of high society simultaneously thrilling and terrifying. Isabel's sharp mind and gentle spirit enchanted Philip. By the end of the evening, he'd invited her for coffee the next day. Coffee turned into dinner. Dinner turned into nights, spent walking along Santa Monica's moonlit beach, discussing hopes for the future. Isabel told him of her dream to become a partner at a major law firm, so she could provide legal support to underprivileged communities. Philip shared his hopes of expanding Donovan Tech to provide innovative tools for small businesses worldwide. Soon they were inseparable. Some said it was a whirlwind romance, but the connection was undeniable. Isabel didn't just appreciate Philip's wealth. In fact, she often asked him if they could scale back and do something more meaningful with his resources. He loved that about her, how down-to-earth she was. Within a year, they were engaged, and in another, they were married in a modest, elegant ceremony. They could have had the wedding at a lavish hotel, maybe even the Beverly Hills Hotel, where plenty of his wealthy associates got married. But they chose a small vineyard in Napa Valley with just close friends and family. It was intimate, genuine, and filled with happiness. Over time, Philip consolidated his company's success and bought a home in Hollywood Hills. Donovan Tech still soared, securing government contracts and forging alliances with corporations overseas. Philip became a frequent traveler, flying between offices in Silicon Valley, London, and Hong Kong. Isabel supported him unconditionally. She continued building her legal career, working in corporate law, but also quietly volunteering for cases involving women who'd been exploited by fraudulent businesses. She never lost her sense of justice or her sense of humility. They seemed like a golden couple, perfectly matched and admired by everyone who heard their story. So when Isabel announced she was pregnant, the news only solidified the belief that their life together was blessed, unstoppable, and nothing short of a fairy tale. Yet beneath every fairy tale, shadows stir. For Philip, the first cracks appeared not long after Isabel's pregnancy announcement. Suddenly, his nights weren't filled with sweet companionship and warm dinners at home. Isabel's energy dipped completely normal for someone expecting a child, but foreign to Philip's experience. She needed more rest, had cravings that disturbed her schedule, and started worrying about the baby's health. While Isabel immersed herself in prenatal care, reading pregnancy guides and planning baby shower details with her closest friend, Emily Jung, Philip found himself alone at more late-night business functions. These events were essential for Donovan Tech's continued growth, negotiating with foreign investors, forging partnerships with big players. These were the lifeblood of Philip's empire. But what was once a passion became a chore. He missed the fun and companionship with Isabel, the long talks that helped keep him grounded. Instead, he spent nights in high-rise bars, swirling whiskey in a crystal tumbler, forced to laugh at jokes from men with deeper pockets, but far less moral backbone. His circle of acquaintances expanded to include people who cared little about anything beyond money and indulgence. These new friends introduced him to the glamour of exclusive parties in Beverly Hills mansions, the seduction of private clubs in Las Vegas, and the perks of membership at wealthy enclaves. They told Philip that with his star power he needed a grander presence, a trophy wife or someone who understood how to play the role. They commented how Isabel, while beautiful in her own right, lacked the flamboyant style necessary for a man in Philip's position. In truth, Philip still loved Isabel dearly. But faced with these influences and the new stress of fatherhood looming, he began to wonder if he could handle it all. A nagging voice whispered that he was too young, that life had more to offer him before settling into the routine of diapers and nannies. One night at a lavish fundraiser for a children's hospital in Los Angeles, where celebrities like Leonardo DiCaprio and big-name entrepreneurs were in attendance, Philip met a woman named Serafina Blackwood. She was introduced by a mutual acquaintance who said, "She's an investor with a keen eye for new opportunities." Serafina was tall, with raven black hair, piercing hazel eyes, and an air of confidence that seemed to fill every corner of the room. She wore a designer gown that glittered under the chandeliers and turned heads everywhere she went. Philip found himself drawn to her conversation. She asked penetrating questions about Donovan Tech's direction. She seemed well-versed in the intricacies of venture capital, the stock market, and public acquisitions. But Serafina also offered something else, a fierce, almost predatory charm that promised excitement. At the end of the night, she slipped him her business card, letting her hand linger on his. "Contact me if you need new investors, or if you just want someone to talk to," she said, giving him a mischievous smile. Philip left the event feeling conflicted. He thought of Isabel pregnant at home, probably asleep on the couch with a half-eaten bowl of ice cream by her side. He shook off the temptation, determined to remain faithful. But in the coming days, Serafina's card burned a hole in his pocket. He told himself it was strictly business, that Donovan Tech could always use a savvy investor with connections in private equity. When he eventually called Serafina, the conversation began about money and ended with her inviting him to dinner. No business talk, just an exchange of ideas. Against his better judgment, he accepted. Their first friendly dinner took place at Spargo, Beverly Hills, a hotspot known for celebrity sightings and top-tier cuisine. Philip arrived nerves on edge, telling himself that Isabel would understand he was simply meeting a contact. But a pang of guilt hit him when he saw Serafina. She was dressed in a sleek black dress, her lips painted a bold shade of red. She stood as he approached, greeting him with a light touch on his shoulder. The tension was immediate, a hum in the air that neither could pretend was purely professional. They spoke about her experiences traveling through Europe, investing in biotech startups, dabbling in real estate. Philip found himself relaxing, leaning into her stories, enjoying the attention. After a few glasses of wine, the conversation took a personal turn. Serafina asked about his family life, his dreams outside the boardroom. He mentioned Isabel and the baby. Serafina smiled politely, but her eyes darkened with something akin to jealousy. She steered the conversation swiftly back to freedom, excitement, spontaneity. She talked about the thrill of living life on the edge of never letting anyone or anything tie you down. A few dinners later, Philip was too far gone to dismiss what was happening. The more time he spent with Serafina, the more enthralled he became by her worldliness, her disregard for convention. She seemed a perfect foil to the domestic constraints he was beginning to feel at home. Slowly, the lines of fidelity blurred. One night, after a particularly grueling negotiation for a new Donovan Tech contract, he texted Serafina to meet him at a bar. When she arrived, her eyes flashed with predatory delight. This time, they didn't bother with the pretense of dinner. Their affair began in the back seat of his chauffeured town car, tinted windows, concealing the first moment of betrayal. In the following weeks, Philip maintained a facade of normalcy around Isabel. She was busy with ultrasound appointments and preparing for the baby's arrival. Though she noticed he was more distant, she assumed it was the stress of finalizing major deals. After all, she knew how demanding Donovan Tech could be. But her instincts warned her that something was off when Philip started coming home later and later. He would mumble something about after-work meetings, slip into bed, and often turn away his phone face down on the nightstand. Isabel tried to focus on the future, trusting her husband's integrity. She had no idea that while she fell asleep alone, her husband was in a penthouse across town, with Serafina lost in a world of fleeting pleasures. Affairs rarely remain hidden for long in high society, and rumors began to swirl. Some people recognized Serafina's name from past exploits. She was known to target influential men who had something to lose. She'd appear at exclusive galas, fundraisers, and VIP clubs, always impeccably dressed, always with a man in tow, who looked enthralled. Philip's close friend and CFO, Alonso Martinez, approached him in private. "What's going on with you and Serafina Blackwood?" he asked one afternoon after a meeting. They were in Philip's sprawling office, the Los Angeles skyline behind them. Philip bristled. "Serafina's an investor, and we have some ongoing negotiations," he answered lamely. Alonso gave him a stern look. "I've heard rumors. People are talking. You need to be careful your reputation and Isabel's. The shareholders won't appreciate a scandal that could tank our brand." "Everything's under control," Philip muttered, dismissing Alonso's concern. But deep down, fear churned in his gut. He knew that if Donovan Tech's board or the media got hold of this story, it could jeopardize business deals and tarnish his carefully crafted public image as a family man. Outside the boardroom, the social scene also buzzed. Isabel's friend Emily Zhang overheard a pair of socialites whispering about Philip and that new woman. Alarmed, she told Isabel what she'd heard. Isabel felt a cold dread wash over her. She recalled the late nights, the distant looks, the phone that never left his side. Still, she hoped there was an innocent explanation. She decided to confront Philip directly. One evening she approached him as he worked in his study. "Philip," she said quietly, hands trembling at her sides. "People have been talking about you and a woman named Serafina. Is there something I need to know?" He acted indignant. "That's crazy. I'm just doing business with her," he retorted, avoiding her gaze. "You shouldn't pay attention to idle gossip." Isabel wanted to believe him. She apologized, tears in her eyes, admitting that her pregnancy hormones and the stress of his late nights might have made her paranoid. Philip consoled her with a half-hearted hug. "Trust me," he murmured. "I'm here for you and our baby." But the guilt gnawed at him. That same night, after Isabel fell asleep, he texted Serafina to confirm plans for the weekend. It was a cycle he couldn't seem to break. He craved the excitement she offered, the thrill of secrecy, and maybe a small part of him resented the impending responsibilities of fatherhood. Serafina didn't settle for being a secret for long. She thrived on attention, adoration, and absolute commitment. At first, she let Philip keep their meetings discreet. She played the part of the enigmatic mistress, meeting him in private suites or at out-of-the-way restaurants. But her ambitions outgrew the shadows. She began making demands. "Philip, darling," she cooed one morning as she lounged in her penthouse wearing his dress shirt and sipping black coffee. "I don't like hiding in the dark. If you want to keep me, I want more of you." "What do you mean more?" he asked, buttoning his shirt already late for a board meeting. Serafina sauntered over, running her fingers along his tie. "I want to be seen on your arm. I want exclusivity. I want you to get rid of any obstacles." He stepped back, alarmed. "You're talking about my wife. She's pregnant, for God's sake. That's your choice, love." She leaned in her eyes, cold. "But don't think I'm going to remain a secret forever. If you can't commit to me, I'm sure there are other men who'd love my attention, especially with my investment portfolio." The threat of her withdrawing financial interest in Donovan Tech was implicit. Conflicted Philip tried to appease her, offering a promise of more time together. But for Serafina, it wasn't enough. She wanted to dominate his life completely. She wanted to replace Isabel, to become the new Mrs. Donovan, with all the prestige that position entailed. Then she played her trump card. A few days later, Serafina accidentally sent him a picture of herself with his top competitor, James Matthews, a venture capitalist who had once tried to sabotage Donovan Tech's IPO. They were at an event together, smiling for the camera. Her message read, "Decisions, decisions. So many interesting partners in the world." That was the final push. Philip panicked. He couldn't stand the idea of Serafina leaving and possibly strengthening James Matthews' company instead. In a move fueled by jealousy and fear, he did the unthinkable. He sat down with Isabel and told her he wanted a divorce. Nothing could have prepared Isabel for that moment. She was 6 months pregnant, her belly round her life revolving around preparing for a child she had conceived with the man she adored. When Philip told her, she stood still, paralyzed. Her world began to crumble around her. "Is this because of Serafina?" she asked, voice trembling with heartbreak. She'd suspected the truth, but hearing him demand a divorce confirmed her worst fears. Philip initially denied it was about another woman, spewing excuses about feeling trapped, losing his sense of self, needing to find happiness again. But Isabel saw the guilt in his eyes. She pressed him until he finally admitted it. He was in love with someone else. Her knees nearly buckled under the weight of betrayal. She had to hold on to the edge of the kitchen counter to steady herself. She thought of their wedding day, the vows they exchanged, the warmth of his arms around her. "How can you do this? Now? when we're so close to having our child. Tears blurred her vision. Philip glanced away, shame flushing his face. "I'm sorry," was all he could manage. His pathetic remorse only stoked the fire in her chest. She had always thought he was a better man. That night, Isabel locked herself in the guest bedroom, refusing to speak further. She phoned her friend Emily, sobbing uncontrollably. Emily rushed over, furious at Philip, and helped Isabel pack a few belongings. Isabel didn't want to leave, but she couldn't stand sleeping under the same roof as the man who had ripped her heart out. She left for her parents' house, clutching her belly protectively. The tabloids got wind of the split almost immediately. "Millionaire tech genius Philip Donovan splits from pregnant wife," read one headline. Another speculated, "Who is the mysterious woman at the center of Philip Donovan's divorce?" Social media buzzed with gossip. Some condemned Philip as a heartless cad. Others speculated Isabel must have been unfaithful, or that the child wasn't his. The truth was overshadowed by sensational rumors. Serafina wasted no time stepping into the spotlight. She appeared with Philip at a high-profile charity gala in Hollywood, her hand resting possessively on his arm. She wore a dazzling silver gown, looking every bit the new queen by his side. She reveled in the cameras flashing the hush that fell over the crowd when they realized Philip was no longer with his wife. Some of Philip's associates were appalled. Alonso Martinez tried to talk sense into Philip, to remind him that the public outcry could tarnish Donovan Tech's reputation. But Serafina encouraged Philip to ignore the critics. "We're above their petty judgments," she insisted. And in his dazed state, confused, filled with guilt, but also obsessively enthralled by Serafina, Philip went along with it. Meanwhile, Isabel retreated from public view. She stayed with her parents, trying to process the emotional turmoil. It wasn't easy. Reporters camped outside the driveway, snapping pictures, shouting questions about her plans. She grew weaker, stressed, struggling with sleepless nights. Doctors warned her that too much tension could harm her pregnancy, so she tried to shut out the world. But she couldn't avoid seeing pictures of Philip and Serafina splashed across tabloids, nor ignore the scornful glances from strangers who recognized her. At her doctor's appointments, she forced a smile and tried to keep her composure. Within a month, Philip had formal divorce papers drafted. He offered Isabel a settlement more than generous in his eyes, and suggested they end things amicably. But something in Isabel snapped when she saw the cold detachment of legal language, the audacity of him placing a price tag on their marriage. She refused to sign. Instead, she contacted a respected divorce attorney, David Klein, who had famously handled complicated cases for top celebrities. Though heartbroken, Isabel resolved that if Philip wanted to discard her so easily, she would fight back. She would protect herself, and most importantly, her child. As Philip's legal battles brewed, Serafina's influence spread through Donovan Tech. She began attending board meetings as Philip's special advisor. Whenever she strode into a conference room, she commanded attention, her sleek business suits tailored to perfection, her hair in a precise chignon. She asked sharp questions about the company's finances, prying into future expansions, marketing budgets, and product roadmaps. Some of the board members grew uneasy, wary of Serafina's meddling. She had no official title, yet she wielded Philip's ear like a master puppeteer. Staffers found her presence intimidating. She would walk the halls greeting employees with a fixed smile that never reached her calculating eyes. Whenever tensions flared, Serafina used her hold on Philip to maintain her position. She might whisper rumors about a certain executive's incompetence, and suddenly Philip would approve their removal, Or she would hint that a certain project was worthless, and soon the project leads found their resources cut. Donovan Tech's culture shifted, turning from the friendly environment Philip had cultivated with Isabel's advice to an atmosphere of fear and sycophancy. On the personal front, Serafina's demands escalated. She wanted a new mansion, bigger than the Hollywood Hills property Isabel had shared with Philip. She wanted him to take her on extravagant vacations to St. Bart's, Monaco, and Bali. If Philip hesitated, she'd mention James Matthews' interest in her, or flirt with other powerful men at events. Consumed by jealousy and insecurity, Philip rushed to fulfill her every whim, depleting more of his energy and resources. He told himself that once the divorce was finalized, Serafina would calm down, and he'd regain control. But it was an illusion. While Philip's life spiraled under Serafina's control, Isabel remained calm, methodical, and resolute. She partnered with David Klein to gather evidence that would bolster her position in the divorce. She documented Philip's sudden withdrawal of funds from their joint accounts, his public escapades with Serafina, and the humiliating way he had abandoned her during pregnancy. Her attorney advised her to also pursue a separate civil suit if she could prove Philip intentionally inflicted emotional distress, particularly detrimental given her condition. Isabel hesitated, not wanting to appear vindictive, but every time she felt pangs of remorse. She remembered how he had humiliated her in the tabloids, effectively branding her as old news while she carried his unborn child. Determined to protect her future and that of her child, she agreed to proceed aggressively. David Klein filed motions for spousal support, child support, and a substantial share of Donovan Tech's assets. He built his empire while you stood by him, offered emotional support, and shaped crucial decisions, David argued. You're entitled to what the law allows, and more if we prove misconduct. As court hearings loomed, news outlets jumped on the story, painting the conflict as the dramatic downfall of a tech titan. Public sympathy largely sided with Isabel, especially among women who were outraged by Philip's betrayal. On social media, hashtags like #TeamIsabel trended with celebrities tweeting support for her plight. Even philanthropic organizations that once partnered with Donovan Tech distanced themselves from Philip, worried about negative press. Under pressure, Philip tried reaching out to Isabel. He left voicemails apologizing, insisting that they not let the situation become a media circus. Isabel listened to them with tears brimming, but she never responded. She had learned the hard way that sometimes the best form of closure is no response at all. The morning of the hearing arrived cloaked in tension. Even the Los Angeles sun, usually radiant and unforgiving, seemed subdued, filtered through a hazy sky, as if it too was holding its breath. Isabel stood in front of the full-length mirror in her guest bedroom, hands resting protectively on her growing belly. 7 months along, she was radiant despite the fatigue in her eyes. Her soft cream dress draped over her curves, simple but elegant, exuding quiet strength. Emily Zhang gently fixed a loose strand of hair and whispered, "You look like the woman he never deserved." Isabel gave a small, bittersweet smile. "Let's go remind him." Outside the Los Angeles Superior Court, reporters gathered like vultures on a scent. Cameras flashed. Microphones jutted forward as if truth could be pulled from air. The headline wrote itself, "Pregnant Wife versus Tech Tycoon Love Lies and a $1 billion Battle." As Isabel stepped out of the black SUV with her attorney David Klein, the crowd stirred. Her poise was undeniable. She walked not like a victim, but like a woman who had been broken, rebuilt herself, and now came to collect what was hers. Moments later, another car arrived. Philip Donovan stepped out, flanked by his lawyers, face tight and expression unreadable. Dressed in a $1,000 suit, he looked more hollow than powerful. At his side, as always, was Serafina, flawless, calculating and utterly out of place in the solemn air of justice. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere shifted. No longer a tabloid circus, the space took on the weight of law of consequence. The judge, a sharp-eyed woman named Honorable Vanessa Reyes, took her seat, tapping the gavel to begin. Court is now in session to hear the initial motions in the matter of Isabel Donovan versus Philip Donovan, she announced. David Klein stood first. Calm, composed, and methodical, he began to unravel the quiet devastation Philip had inflicted. Your Honor. David began. This is not simply a matter of infidelity. This is a case of abandonment, coercion, and financial manipulation. My client, a woman who stood beside Mr. Donovan from the foundation of his empire, is now 7 months pregnant, discarded for a mistress, and cut off from the very wealth she helped build. Gasps murmured through the gallery. David clicked a remote, and a screen behind him came alive with a timeline, emails, wire transfers, photographs, receipts. He presented damning evidence. Money funneled to Serafina's LLC. Unauthorized withdrawals from joint marital accounts, lavish gifts purchased during the months Philip claimed business meetings. Then came the text messages. One by one, messages from Philip to Serafina appeared on the screen, coded flirtatious, then explicit, dated weeks before he had informed Isabel of the divorce. This message, David said, pointing, was sent the same night Isabel was hospitalized for dehydration related to her pregnancy. Philip stiffened in his seat. Philip's defense team scrambled. They argued irreconcilable differences, claiming Isabel had grown distant, unsupportive, and emotionally withdrawn. They painted Philip as a man under pressure, carrying the weight of a growing empire and an unsustainable marriage. But when the defense attorney tried to press the point, Judge Reyes interrupted. Are you suggesting that your client's affair and financial misconduct are justified by his wife's pregnancy-related fatigue? The courtroom fell silent. The defense attorney swallowed hard and changed direction. Then Isabel took the stand. The room quieted as she walked forward. Every eye followed her, some with pity, others with admiration. She was calm, measured, but beneath her composure, emotion rippled like a current. She began by telling the court about their early days, late nights, building dreams, the sacrifices they made, the love they shared. Then she spoke of the changes, the lies, the growing distance, the humiliation of discovering her husband's betrayal in headlines instead of in person. I carried his child while he carried another woman on his arm, she said. And I'm not just fighting for money. I'm fighting for dignity, for the child who deserves better than this. There were tears in the room, audible sniffling from strangers, quiet gasps of sympathy. Serafina crossed her arms, visibly irritated. Philip looked down, face flushed with shame. David wrapped up the day's proceedings with a final statement. This court has the opportunity to send a message that women who sacrifice, who love, who build alongside their partners are not disposable. That actions, especially from those with power and wealth, have consequences. After hours of testimonies and cross-examinations, Judge Reyes called a recess. But before adjourning, she issued a preliminary ruling. Until the final division of assets is determined, Mr. Donovan will pay temporary spousal and child support. He is also ordered to provide complete financial transparency and may not make further discretionary transfers from any shared or corporate accounts. The court takes evidence of asset concealment seriously. A formal audit will be conducted. Philip's lawyer paled. Serafina scoffed. David Klein smiled gently, placing a hand on Isabel's shoulder. "You were magnificent," he said. Isabel closed her eyes, letting out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. It wasn't over, not by far. But for the first time since everything had collapsed, she felt the scales begin to tip. Not just in her favor, but toward something greater justice. With the first court date behind them, Serafina's impatience grew. She realized that simply divorcing Isabel wasn't going to be enough to free Philip from legal obligations. He was bound to pay significant support, and the prospect of Isabel becoming a major shareholder in Donovan Tech loomed threatening Serafina's hold over the company. In a fit of anger one night, Serafina confronted Philip in their penthouse suite. "You promised me everything," she spat, flinging a vase at the wall. "Now you're letting her and her lawyer take it all from under your nose." Philip pleaded for patience, but his attempts to calm her only fueled her rage. She accused him of being weak, of letting an old flame cripple his future. He tried to remind her that Isabel was carrying his child, to which Serafina scoffed. "Why should I care about that brat?" Her callousness hit Philip like a slap. For a moment he saw the monstrous side of the woman he'd allowed to overshadow his life. But instead of standing up for himself, he capitulated once again. He assured her that once the settlement was done, they could move on and build a new empire together. Serafina was far from satisfied. She slipped away the following week to meet James Matthews, the competitor who had once threatened Donovan Tech's IPO. Photographed at a swanky rooftop bar, they appeared quite friendly. The images circulated quickly, stirring rumors that Serafina might jump ship. Philip confronted her enraged. She merely shrugged, reminding him that she had her own ambitions and wouldn't wait forever for him to deliver. The fallout from the courtroom hearing rippled through Philip's world like an earthquake cracking through glass. He'd walked into the courthouse expecting a scolding, maybe a financial hit, but walked out with his credibility on life support and a court-ordered audit that sent shockwaves through the very foundation of Donovan Tech. And worse, he was no longer in control. 2 days after the hearing, David Klein's office received a brown envelope. No return address. No name. Just a USB drive inside and a typed note. Thought she should know. When Klein plugged it into his secure system, what he found stunned even him. A spreadsheet of internal transfers, screenshots of emails between Philip and his accountant, bank statements showing over $3 million quietly funneled into an LLC under Serafina's name during the marriage. Klein didn't waste a moment. He filed an emergency motion with the court that same afternoon. Philip sat in his penthouse pacing. His phone had been buzzing relentlessly. Calls from board members, lawyers, and now Alonzo, his CFO and longtime friend. "You need to come to the office," Alonzo said sharply. "Now!" "Why? What's going on?" Alonzo's voice was tight. "There's a board meeting. They've seen the audit order, and the media is circling like sharks." Philip ran a hand through his hair, the knot in his stomach tightening. "Just hold them off. I'll handle it." "No," Philip, Alonzo replied. "You won't. They're voting." By the time Philip arrived at Donovan Tech headquarters, the boardroom was tense. He opened the door to find 11 stone-faced executives and Alonzo standing at the head. "What the hell is this?" he asked, trying to sound in control. One of the older board members, Ms. Langston, replied coolly, This is an emergency motion to suspend your role as CEO until the legal proceedings against you are resolved and the financial audit is completed. You can't. We already did, Alonso said firmly. You're out, Philip, effective immediately. I'll be stepping in as interim CEO. Philip stared at him, stunned. You of all people are stabbing me in the back. No, Alonso said, eyes full of quiet pain. I'm saving the company from you. That night, Serafina returned to the penthouse and found Philip in a daze. He was sitting on the floor, shirt wrinkled, a glass of scotch, untouched beside him. They took it, he muttered. Everything. They took my company. Serafina stood in the doorway, her heels clicking against the marble floor. She crossed her arms. You said you had it under control. His eyes flicked up to her, filled with something raw and dangerous. You knew the transfers were illegal. You pushed for them. She tilted her head. You made your own choices, Philip. Don't blame me for your lack of spine. The coldness in her voice startled him. For the first time, he saw her without the glamour, without the seduction. He saw the truth. You used me, he said hoarsely. She didn't deny it. I invested in you, she said. And like any investor, when the returns stop coming, I move on. Then she dropped her final blow. I met with James Matthews last week, she said, referring to Philip's long-time competitor. He offered me a consulting role. I'm considering it. You can't, Philip said, voice cracking. You said you loved me. Serafina's smile was cruel. I said what you needed to hear. She turned and walked out of the penthouse. No tears, no goodbyes. Philip didn't follow. At the same time, across town, Isabel received the update from Klein. She listened in silence as he explained the leaked documents, the emergency court motion, the board suspension. When he finished, there was a long pause. Then Isabel whispered, He's finally reaping what he sowed. And yet her voice didn't carry triumph. It carried closure. She stood from the kitchen table, resting her hands on her belly. The baby kicked softly. The world had shifted, not because she fought to hurt Philip, but because she had refused to stay silent. The turning point wasn't just in court. It was here in her strength, her refusal to disappear, her decision to rise. For the first time in months, Philip found himself alone. The penthouse felt cold and empty without Serafina's presence. Though once the haze lifted, he realized it had always been a place devoid of genuine warmth. He wandered through the silent rooms, haunted by memories of Isabel's laughter in their old home, the tenderness she'd shown him. He remembered how she used to massage his shoulders after long work days, or bring him hot chocolate when he was stressed. He thought of how excited she'd been to start a family, how she'd practically glowed when she first told him she was pregnant. He sank onto a plush sofa, burying his face in his hands. The immensity of his loss crashed in on him. He had destroyed the marriage that was built on love and trust. He had forsaken the child who was soon to enter the world. And for what? A fleeting thrill with a woman who had manipulated and used him only to leave when the going got tough. A call came from Alonso. I'm sorry it's come to this, Alonso said, genuine sadness in his voice. The board voted unanimously. You're out until the legal matters are resolved. Tossing his phone aside, Philip felt hollow. He'd lost everything: his family, his position, his reputation. In a moment of desperation, he searched his phone for Isabel's number, thinking to call to hear her voice, to beg her forgiveness. But would she even answer? A wave of shame stopped him. He realized he had no right to reach out, not after all he'd put her through. Yet he couldn't ignore the gnawing dread that he might never hold his child in his arms. He sank deeper into despair, questioning how he'd allowed his life to spiral so far out of control. Despite her heartbreak and anger, Isabel was not a cruel person. She heard from mutual acquaintances that Philip had been ousted from his company and that Serafina had left him. Part of her felt grim satisfaction, karma for his betrayal. But another part, one that still remembered the good in him, felt sorrow for how far he'd fallen. As her due date approached, Isabel's health took a precarious turn. Stress had affected her blood pressure. During a routine checkup, her doctor decided to induce labor earlier than expected to avoid complications. Suddenly, Isabel found herself in a hospital bed, alone, aside from Emily's comforting presence. She realized that once upon a time, it would have been Philip holding her hand. In the middle of the night between contractions, she had an unexpected visitor. David Klein entered the room, looking troubled. "Philip's attorney contacted me," he said softly. "He wanted me to inform you that Philip's been trying to reach you. He wants to know if he can see you or be there for the baby's birth." Isabel felt a storm of emotions swirl in her chest. She was livid that he dared ask to be present. She wanted to say no to protect herself from further pain. But as she clutched her belly, feeling the baby's restless movements, she remembered that this child was his too. And that maybe, just maybe, her child deserved a chance at some bond with its father. Philip arrived at the hospital trembling with nerves, his suit rumpled eyes bloodshot. He'd expected Isabel to bar him from the room, so when Emily signaled he could enter, he exhaled in relief tinged with terror. Inside, Isabel was in active labor. The room was filled with the beeping of monitors and the hushed voices of nurses. She glanced up at Philip, tears and sweat mingling on her face, a mix of pain and raw emotion swirling in her eyes. In that instant he felt how badly he'd betrayed her, how unworthy he was to stand there at her side. Tentatively he approached. He whispered, "I'm so sorry. I know I have no right, but I just want to be here for you, for our baby." She didn't reply, too exhausted, and engulfed in the process of bringing new life into the world. Hours later, a piercing cry echoed through the room. Their son arrived, a tiny, perfect being with a shock of dark hair. Isabel sobbed with relief and a primal love that overcame all else in that moment. Philip watched in awe, tears streaming down his face. He realized no moment in his life, no business victory, no glamorous party, no fling with Serafina could compare to witnessing his child's birth. Isabel cradled the baby, ignoring Philip. But the nurse gently placed the infant in his arms next. For a brief second, father and son connected. The newborn's cries subsided as Philip held him, tears dripping off Philip's jaw. "He's beautiful," Philip whispered. Isabel said nothing, her face turned away. In the following days, Isabel recuperated. She allowed Philip occasional visits to the hospital room, mostly because she wanted their son to experience having his father around, albeit in a limited capacity. But she remained distant, her eyes cold, her words clipped. Philip brought flowers, toys for the baby, and tried to talk to her about possibly reconciling. She refused to discuss anything but the child's well-being, her defenses impenetrable. He tried to apologize again and again to explain how he'd been manipulated, how he'd lost himself. But Isabel cut him off each time. "It doesn't matter anymore. Actions have consequences. You made your choice." It stung, and he had no one to blame but himself. Once the baby was stable enough to go home, Isabel left the hospital, politely declining Philip's offer of a ride. David Klein contacted Philip's attorney, making it clear that Isabel was open to agreeing on custody arrangements, but she would not consider halting the divorce or the lawsuit. She wanted full legal custody until the child was old enough for them to discuss a visitation schedule. Philip tried to protest, but he had no leverage left. His finances were under scrutiny, his reputation in tatters, and the law was on Isabel's side. The final divorce hearing approached, and from what Philip could gather, he stood to lose a large share of his personal assets, as well as ongoing financial obligations to both Isabel and his son. When the day arrived for the final hearing, the tension was palpable. Cameras once again lined the courthouse halls, but the media frenzy had calmed, somewhat overshadowed by newer scandals and celebrity gossip. Still, enough reporters were present to chronicle the likely downfall of a once-admired tech entrepreneur. Isabel appeared poised, wearing a simple blouse and skirt, her hair pulled back. She carried herself with quiet confidence, maternal grace, evident from the protective way she spoke about her infant son. Philip seemed smaller, as though a weight pressed down upon him. He'd lost noticeable weight, his eyes ringed with fatigue. David Klein presented final arguments. "Your Honor, the facts are clear. My client supported Mr. Donovan from the earliest stages of his career. She contributed emotional support, legal insight, and served as a stabilizing partner in life and business. While pregnant, she was abandoned for another woman, resulting in severe emotional distress that impacted her health and that of her unborn child. Furthermore, we have evidence that Mr. Donovan attempted to conceal marital assets. We believe Mrs. Donovan is entitled to a fair and substantial portion of those assets, along with primary custody of the child." Philip's attorney tried to salvage the situation by emphasizing that Philip was willing to take responsibility for his child and had already paid significant temporary support. They argued that he should retain controlling interest in Donovan Tech to potentially rebuild the fortune, which would ultimately benefit the child's future. But it was a weak argument against the mountain of evidence and the judge's earlier admonishments. The judge took a recess before delivering the final verdict. When court reconvened, her face was stern but resolute. "In light of the evidence, I am awarding Mrs. Donovan a substantial settlement reflective of her contributions to Mr. Donovan's success and the emotional harm inflicted. She will receive a large portion of Donovan Tech's remaining shares, held by Mr. Donovan, as well as significant spousal support and child support payments. Legal custody of the minor child will primarily reside with Mrs. Donovan. Mr. Donovan will have visitation rights pending a formal arrangement agreed upon by both parties or mandated by this court." Her gavel struck. The case was decided. The press quickly reported that Philip Donovan's ex-wife had essentially gained controlling interest in Donovan Tech, while the fallen founder was left with a diminished fortune. Some headlines called it one of the most expensive divorces in tech history. Others praised Isabel for standing up to injustice, calling her a new advocate for women who had been betrayed in marriage. Philip staggered from the courtroom, feeling as though the world had collapsed around him again. But this time, instead of collapsing into despair, he felt a strange sense of relief. At least the war was over. Now he could attempt to piece together a life from the wreckage. Isabel walked past him, her lawyer guiding her gently by the elbow. She paused briefly, glancing at Philip, who held her gaze. Then she turned away, leaving him behind. He understood that any chance at reconciliation was gone. The heartbreak he saw in her eyes told him she might never forgive him. But perhaps someday she might acknowledge that he wanted to be a good father if he could prove himself worthy of that role. In the weeks that followed, Isabel focused on caring for her newborn son, whom she named Gabriel. She moved into a new house in a quiet neighborhood near her parents, wanting Gabriel to grow up surrounded by a loving family. She began philanthropic work using her newly acquired shares in Donovan Tech to influence the company's direction, diverting resources to programs that helped small businesses and charitable causes. Shareholders admired her vision and her calm demeanor, a stark contrast to Philip's scandal-ridden downfall. Philip, meanwhile, accepted a consulting role at a small startup, humbled by the knowledge that he'd once been a tech titan, but was now an employee at someone else's firm. He spent his evenings alone, reading self-help books and therapy worksheets. He attended counseling sessions, trying to unravel the insecurities and greed that led him astray. Bit by bit, he tried to regain some measure of stability. He reached out to Isabel through her lawyer, asking for scheduled visitation with Gabriel. Though wary, Isabel allowed short visits under supervision, wanting Gabriel to at least know his father. Over time, those short visits became more frequent. Philip doted on his son, reading children's stories, playing peekaboo, and marveling at every small milestone. Each time he felt the searing regret of having destroyed the chance to share those moments under one happy roof. On Gabriel's first birthday, Isabel decided to host a small party at her home, inviting close friends and family. Against everyone's expectations, she invited Philip. He arrived with a simple gift, a hand-crafted wooden rocking horse he'd commissioned, symbolic of his desire to give Gabriel something lasting and genuine. As the gathering wound down, Philip and Isabel found themselves alone on the backyard patio, watching Gabriel bounce in Emily Zhang's arms. The tension lingered, but there was a trace of civility now. Philip cleared his throat. "Thank you for letting me be here," he said softly. "I know I don't deserve it." She studied him for a moment. He looked different, humble, subdued, lacking the arrogance he once carried like a second skin. "It's for Gabriel," she replied. "I want him to have a father." Philip nodded, tears in his eyes. "I'll do whatever it takes to be a better man for him." She didn't respond, but in her silence there was a hint of understanding. She still couldn't forgive him for his betrayal, but she recognized that people can change, especially when it comes to their children. As the afternoon sun bathed the backyard in a soft glow, Isabel looked out at the horizon. She felt a mix of relief, sadness, and a quiet hope that her future and Gabriel's would be brighter without the weight of Philip's deception. Meanwhile, Philip silently vowed to use the second chance at fatherhood to become the man he should have been all along. Thus the fairy tale life of Philip Donovan ended, replaced by a more complicated, but ultimately more authentic story. A story where a man lost everything to his own greed and illusions, only to discover that real value lay in the simple, steadfast bonds of family. A lesson learned too late, but not too late, to shape a better tomorrow for the son he loved. And so ends the tangled saga of deception, betrayal, and redemption. In the heart of this drama, one truth stands out. No amount of wealth, success, or fleeting passion can replace the power of love, loyalty, and genuine partnership. Philip Donovan's downfall came fast and hard, while Isabel emerged a symbol of resilience, proving that even in heartbreak, there is strength and a chance to rebuild. If this story captivated you, if you felt the highs and lows, the tension in the courtroom, and the bittersweet moments of reconciliation, then we invite you to be part of our community. Like this video, share it with friends who love a good drama, and subscribe to our channel for more intense, real-life tales filled with lessons about the human heart. Stay tuned for more stories that remind us all what we chase in life can define our destiny.